Just think about it. 50 years ago, 4 out of 5 Chinese worked in the fields, and 96% of Chinese live below the poverty line. And today, China produces almost a third of all goods on the planet, starts trade wars, and participates in the space race with Russia and the United States. And all this under the rule of the Communist Party and the absence of broad democracy. How has China managed to overtake those who, it seemed, were simply impossible to catch up with in the last 30 years? Let's dive into the unique story of how the oldest of the living empires is winning back its dominion. By the beginning of the 20th century, China's economy was in a severe crisis. The intelligentsia and the military demanded the overthrow of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic. Moreover, China saw that it was possible to live differently. After all, Japan was very close, which not long ago was in a similar situation. But in the end, it underwent the Meiji Restoration, overthrew the old feudal system, and became a leader in the world economy. And although the dying Chinese government tried to carry out liberal reforms, the standard of living grew too slowly, and the political elite was closely connected with Western capital. All this caused discontent among the army and the population, which ultimately resulted in the Xinhai Revolution of 1911 and the abdication of the last emperor of China from the throne. After this, China plunged into a period of political anarchy during which many warring factions operated on the territory of the country. The two main political forces in China at that time were the communist and nationalist armies. The first was formed under the influence of the October Revolution in Russia and had great influence among the peasants, the main population of China. The second party, the Kuomintang, collaborated with the industrial and landowning elites, following the example of the West and Japan, and advocated gradual reforms. The confrontation between the parties very quickly turned into a civil war, in which the more organized and massive Kuomintang party won. This change in political vector was no longer to the liking of Japan, which actually had its own appetites for Chinese territories and resources. And therefore, the establishment of a strong government inside China was of no use to Japan. But China no longer wanted to submit to anyone. That is why in 1937, a war broke out between the land of the rising sun and the Celestial Empire. In the face of a common enemy, the two parties buried the hatchet. The regular army of the Kuomintang fought the Japanese head-on, and the partisan detachments of the Communist Party carried out sabotage and distracted the enemy troops. But if the Kuomintang was perceived by the Japanese as the main enemy, and often lost, but being less technically equipped, then the Red Movement successfully undermined the Japanese positions in the rear with the help of guerrilla attacks. So when Japan capitulated in 1945 and the struggle for power inside China resumed, the Kuomintang was greatly exhausted. The ruling party was mired in corruption and no longer looked as attractive in the eyes of the population as the communist heroes. Moreover, the leader of the Communist Party, Mao Zedong, actively cooperated with the powerful Soviet Union, which was China's most important geopolitical neighbor. And as a result, when after World War II another civil war broke out in China between the Kuomintang and the Communist Party, the communist troops won. And on October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong declared the creation of the People's Republic of China. The Kuomintang troops were pushed south and eventually forced to flee to Taiwan, which, due to its isolation, was not influenced by the Red Movement. There, the Kuomintang found itself under the protection of the United States Navy, which of course was not thrilled with the cooperation between China and the Soviet Union. In short, the Europeans, who had previously made so much money from China, would first be ousted by Japan. And when the war ended, World War II, China, like most of Asia, will be under the influence of two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The United States, having lost China, will initially not recognize Mao's power at all and will actively support the economies of Japan and South Korea so as not to lose the southeastern region. And now it would seem China has become independent for the first time in centuries. But at the same time, Mao's rule, which lasted from 1949 to to 1976 is one of the most controversial periods in the economy and politics of China. Why is that? The fact is that with the coming to power of the communists in China, the classic history of building socialism began. Nationalization of enterprises, collectivization of agriculture, and restructuring of the economy on planned tracks. And all this, of course, with the support of the Soviet Union, from where raw materials, equipment, and specialists were supplied to China. Everything so that China could make a big leap as quickly as possible from an agrarian economy to an industrial one. In 1958, Mao announced that the country must quickly modernize and increase production in the agricultural sector by 2.5 times, and in industry by as much as 6.5 times. Mao was especially concerned about metallurgy. In 15 years, he intended to overtake Great Britain in the volume of steel produced. But it is easy to say, but very difficult to do, when you have neither technology nor resources. But a plan is a plan, it must be carried out. For this, peasant communes were created throughout China, where they paid not in money, but in workdays, and they could then be exchanged for food. On average, this amounted to about 250 grams of food per day per person. That is, China literally implemented the principle, who does not work, neither shall he eat. Of course, it is difficult to judge from the couch how effective this policy was, but if in the Soviet Union, to solve this problem, they built factories back in the 1920s, then in China they took a different path. The courtyards of peasant houses turned into makeshift smelters. By order of the party, peasants smelted everything that could be smelted. Tools for working in the fields, kitchen utensils, and other household items. It got to the point that people simply stopped working the land, devoting themselves entirely to the new craft, while the field stood idle and the harvest rotted. And on paper, smelting, of course, grew. Propaganda trumpeted the successes of the working people, but the quality of this product was terrible. It could not withstand any world competition. At the same time, Mao declared war on 4 pests: sparrows, mice, mosquitoes, and flies. According to the idea of the Great Kормchev, this would allow preserving crops, increasing crop yields, and improving the health of the nation, since these pests spread diseases. The main target of the company was sparrows. According to various estimates, almost 2 billion sparrows were destroyed over the years of its implementation. There are practically none left in China. And at first, crop yields really did increase, but it suddenly turned out that sparrows eat not only grain, but also insects. And without this natural predator, locusts and caterpillars that destroyed the harvest bred all over China. Already in 1960, realizing its mistake, China imported 250,000 sparrows from the Soviet Union just to restore the bird population and bring balance to the ecosystem. The results of Mao's populist policy, starting from the introduction of days of work to the extermination of sparrows, was one of the largest famines in world history, due to which, according to various estimates, from 20 to 45, and no, not thousands, millions of people died. As a result, these reforms were rolled back, and the blame for the failures was shifted to local officials, accusing them of incompetence and improper execution of the instructions of the great helmsman. And the next 10 years of the Communist Party's rule never made China an advanced industrial power. By the 70s, it still remained an agrarian country, where 4 out of 5 Chinese worked in the fields, and their main working tool was not a tractor, but a hoe. At the same time, 96% of the population lived below the poverty line. That is, they could barely survive, eating mainly rice, and so on year after year. But despite all this, the cult of Mao was unbreakable, and not only because of mass propaganda. Just so you know, Mao's Quotations is the 3rd book in the world in terms of circulation, with almost 1 billion copies. Only the Bible and the Quran have been printed more in the world. But Mao's achievements are not limited to dubious reforms and slow economic growth. Put yourself in the shoes of a Chinese peasant. Just a couple of decades ago, you lived in a country that was in a constant state of war. And then a ruler comes along who brings you peace, returns your country to the status of a power, and people begin to reckon with it. Now you and your children can get at least a basic free education. Under Mao, the illiteracy rate dropped by a third in just 10 years, and people even got health insurance. In general, the common man felt that the state was finally caring about him, and the great helmsman was leading the country towards a bright future. But you must agree that this still looks more like elements of propaganda and not on the explosive economic growth that we want to see. After all, China remained a third world country. But then, at the expense of what was the country able to turn the tide of its history and build the strongest economy on the planet? To answer this question, I will introduce you to the author of The Great Economic Miracle of China, the second man in the Communist Party, after Mao Zedong with Deng Xiaoping.